To start off our day, we're going to have a panel that focuses on the Postal Service and our democratic rights. For many Americans, the Postal Service is the only part of government that they regularly interact with. It has long played a critically important civic role in our country, from the spread of educational and political material to facilitating vote by mail and connecting citizens to far-flung government services. The Postal Service has also been a traditional source of dignified, family-sustaining work for many communities, particularly African Americans and our country's veterans. This panel will look at the Postal Service's place in our democracy and explore ways that the Postal Service can better connect all of us and strengthen our democracy and the ongoing march towards civil rights. I'll introduce all of our panelists from the start and then have them take it away. Our first speaker will be Hilary Shelton. Hilary is the Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Policy at the NAACP and is the Director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau. The NAACP has been a longtime defender of the Postal Service, and last year, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund joined my organization, Public Citizen, in suing the Postal Service to ensure that mail-in ballots weren't affected by PMG DeJoy's mail delays. Our second speaker will be Jennifer Lamson. Jen is the Interim Executive Director of the Democracy Initiative. The DI is a coalition of organizations that recognizes that in order to win any number of just causes, we must first ensure that our democracy functions and that every citizen has an equal say in our democracy. Finally, we'll hear from Melanie Campbell. Melanie is the President and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. She's long been active in the Grand Alliance work. The National Coalition organizes, mobilizes, and educates young leaders in the Black community and seeks to tear down barriers to full participation in our democracy. Hilary, you're first. The floor is yours. Oh, you're gonna need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And I had two options for unmuting myself, so this is great. And that was not supposed to be a commercial for Verizon, by the way. but nonetheless, listen, let me just say on behalf of the NAACP, Susan, the United States' oldest and largest grassroots-based civil rights organization, one that has just celebrated our 112th anniversary. So we've been around a while. Think about the communities that we serve. As we know, we're an organization that has 2,200 membership units, and we're in every state in the United States, but we're also still on military bases as we work towards the integration of our armed services, being around as long as we have. Our work to support the postal workers is one that is very near and dear to our heart throughout the country. You see, it has been the U.S. Postal Service that's provided so many important services in our communities that none other would provide. People think about the brave men and women of the Postal Service that do the basics of delivering our mail, and of course, all the stages that lead from when that piece of mail leaves one place and arrives at the other. And all that is important as well. But there are many services that our Postal Service provided in our communities because they're the only ones that would. When we think about some low-level financial services issues, checks and otherwise to get around, it is that post office. It's a place that I will be sent by my parents to take care of those issues and the like. And so think about those who have entered the middle class. No particular organization or agency has done more to usher African Americans and other people of color into the middle class than the U.S. Postal Service throughout the country. So I knew my postal worker growing up, and you may remember back in the days when they had the old pit helmets and the great Bermuda shorts as they walked through the neighborhoods delivering the mail. You knew what your Postal Service's name was. And usually if you got a new one, as I did very recently, I spoke initially as a kid growing up, but just a month ago, we got a new postal worker in my neighborhood. And my previous postal worker rang the doorbell to introduce him, to make sure we knew who he was. And that relationship with the Postal Workers Union as well as Postal Services would be continuous, moving from one worker to the next. In my opinion, that's great service, great work, and something that we need. It's sad that as we look at the attacks on our postal services, that is those that are looking ways to chisel things down, to chisel money away, and to create other problems for something that has been so successful throughout our country. So with that, the NAACP is excited about moving to improve the services, restore many of those programs, and make sure that our postal workers have everything they need to provide that critical service to our communities, our neighborhoods throughout the country. So, Stephen, we're excited. We're excited because a coalition like this one moving into a Congress like this, I'd have to say that even though the NAACP is nonpartisan, what we saw grow out of this grand alliance leading up to our last presidential election, elected all 435 voting in the House, and of course the 6 that can't vote as delegates representing territories of the United States, but also the 100 US senators and the president and vice president of the United States. I'm convinced that we made history then. We made history as the country turned out in record numbers to make sure that every American's vote would be heard. But what we heard from those votes, electing not only Joe Biden to the presidency, but the first woman and the first woman of color into the vice presidency. As we watch more people of color, more women, greater diversity, even in the leadership in the US Congress, we've seen that very well the chairs of the important committees as we move our legislative, our policy agenda through are very much falling into place. And they're those that are friends to a great extent to organizations on this call to make sure we can move all of our issues forward. So I'm excited because we put the right players on the field. We have the right strategy to make sure that we can move this forward and prevent the hemorrhaging and the attacks on our postal service. We also know we're putting the right people in the Department of Labor because we want to make sure that the protection of those that come to work for us as laborers in our country are very well protected as well. So we're excited about how things move along those lines. So it's great to sit here on today. And let's take a victory run for just a second. A victory run to celebrate what we've been able to do, but more importantly, as we're thinking about what we just did, the plans and the vision to be able to move it forward, to make sure that our postal services are strong, our communities have what they need, and we're not just here to preserve the service and the program, but to grow it, to expand it, to make sure it meets the real needs of our communities in real terms in this 21st century. So the NAACP, 500,000 card-carrying members, 2,200 membership units. We have units on college campuses throughout the country, are all in alignment and all excited about working with this grand alliance. So Susan, thank you very much. Looking forward to working.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Very much appreciate that. Next up, we'll pass the floor to Jen Lamson from the DI. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am really very honored to be here today to be part of this conversation about charting the future for our beloved Postal Service. Thank you to President Dimmenstein and all the team at the American Postal Workers Union for your steadfast leadership, your solidarity and partnership, and your faith in collective action. And I'm especially honored to be sitting at the virtual table today with such esteemed and accomplished and wise civil rights leaders as Hilary, Shelton, and Melanie Campbell. I'm here today representing the Democracy Initiative. We are a social justice coalition of 75 organizations with a collective 45 million members. Our partners fight for workers, for civil rights, for social justice, and for the environment. And they are united in their commitment to realizing the promise of American democracy where all people have an equal seat at the governing table. Democracy Initiative partners are also united in acknowledging the fundamental truth that collective organizing and action is the only way, it's the only path to realizing the promise of our democracy. Democracy Initiative partners are also united in a deep understanding that the post office is a central pillar of our democracy. And if one is looking to cultivate unity in America, one should look to the post office. Dating back to 1775 and enshrined in the Constitution, it is one of our oldest and most unifying and inclusive institutions in the country. The post office facilitates the free flow of information, correspondence, goods, and services to every American, regardless of geographic location. There really are not many other institutions that we can say that about. And in a democracy, we have to have some shared common interests. The Postal Service is one of those. And if you really take a close look, what you will see is that it is the post office greasing the wheels of our democracy. It provides critical infrastructure for our democracy. Vote by mail, yes, but beyond vote by mail, critical civic information and tools for participation, including where to vote in person, where you can vote, where and when you can vote early, information about candidates, information about ballot questions, information about the census, and of course, ballots. Long before the pandemic hit, postal workers and the Democracy Initiative saw the importance of vote by mail as a key reform for expanding access to voting. We really were following our partners, the postal workers, in advocating for vote by mail. For the past 3 years, DI has collaborated closely with the postal workers to promote vote by mail to our social justice partners while working hard to align the broader democracy reform movement around it. By November of 2019, pre-pandemic, the Democracy Initiative partners adopted an organizing plan for 2020 that was centered on expansion of vote by mail. When the pandemic hit, threatening our health, our economy, and the crucial 2020 election, as well as the Postal Service, our partners were ready and they showed up, activating a collective 1 million members to advocate for relief funding for the post office and against the Trump administration's attempted sabotage. Linking arms with our brothers and sisters in the postal workers unions, Democracy Initiative partners like Clean Water Action, Common Cause, the Franciscan Action Network, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, League of Women Voters, Move On, Sierra Club, and of course the NAACP and the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation took up this collective fight, sending action alerts, tweeting up a storm, speaking out in the media, all to say, really, showing their love for this institution and a finely honed understanding of its central role in democracy. And all I can say is thank God and thank all of you, because nearly half of all voters in the historic 2020 election voted by mail. That's a lot of civic participation in the hands of our postal workers, 135 million ballots. A lot of hard work also went into advocating for and winning new vote by mail expansions across the country last year. In 2020, 45 states gave all voters the chance to vote by mail. 4 new states and the District of Columbia mailed ballots to all voters. 8 new states mailed ballot applications to all voters, and 10 new states allowed no excuse absentee voting. We thought we were locking arms in solidarity to save the post office in 2020, but what we actually saved was our democracy. Or maybe we just bought it some time. We are now in the midst of a major backlash by those who would rather change the rules for voting than figure out how to win fair and square. Since the election, 43 states have already proposed more than 250 bills to restrict or limit voting access this year, intentionally aiming to drown out the voices of voters, particularly Black and Brown voters who voted in record numbers this past election cycle. And vote by mail is a major target of those efforts. So what does this mean for our work together? In some ways, the to-do list is a short one. 1, save the post office and expand the post office. 2, save democracy. You are having the right conversation. What does a public service institution such as the post office look like in 21st century America? We are having a similar conversation. What does a 21st century democracy look like? My answer to both questions is that these are our systems, our processes, our public institutions. Our vision for a 21st century democracy is a vibrant one, and fundamentally it is about realizing the promise of democracy for everyone, especially those that have been denied a full seat at the governing table. And we can't get there without a strong public postal service. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Finally, we'll hear from Melanie Campbell. Go right ahead, Melanie. You're good to go? Yep.
Me, Melanie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So
Thank you
sorry.
so much.
Okay. Technology works when you want it to, and sometimes not. Today is sometimes not. So I'm on my phone, so I'm a little thrown off. So I apologize for that. My laptop was working fine, and all of a sudden, didn't want to work. But first of all, it's great to be here with my APW family, Grand Alliance family. And I want to first give a shout out to President Diamondstein, my sister Liz Powell, Judy Beard, and all the members who are here today. My fellow panelists, my brother Hilary and Jennifer. It's great to be here with you all today. So I'm going to ditto all that my fellow panelists have said, and just talk a little bit about how, I grew up in a small town. Some people may see it as a big town, Mims, Florida, where now my late mother, who's been gone for 5 years now, and till she was 87 years young, would be able to drive to the post office, right? She was able to drive herself there. It was a gathering place for ease of service. So I have a special thought about the Postal Service because it makes me think about my mom, Janet Campbell. But the Postal Service has played a vital role in providing generations of Black people with secure middle-class employment that has allowed us to build generational wealth and retire with livable pensions. The union protections offered to Postal Service employees have given Black workers a place to avoid some of the discrimination that exists in some of the broader employment world. 68% of Black women are the sole breadwinners of our households. The union protections that Black women have in the Postal Service allow us to avoid some of the racial and gender discrimination that Black women experience in other employment sectors, and offer them more opportunities for promotions and regular pay increases, the ability to provide a middle-class lifestyle for our families and help put their children through college. For Black people in rural and remote communities, the U.S. Postal Service is not a public service, it's a lifeline. Because the Postal Service is legally required to deliver all mail to all postal addresses in all regions at a flat rate, no matter how far that mail has to go and has to travel. The Postal Service is accessible and affordable. And it's our national treasure. It's the American people's Postal Service. And we have to fight to keep it that way. This especially is important for rural residents who live and sometimes live in poverty, and for people with disabilities who can't afford the cost of a private business to deliver their daily necessities. And in this time of a pandemic, global pandemic, COVID-19, when people are hurting economically, unemployed, underemployed, and may have illnesses that they're battling with, we need the U.S. Postal Service to deliver prescriptions, paychecks, packages from distant loved ones, and learning materials to students with poor or no internet access. I can tell you, I've having the privilege of working from home, because it is a privilege, because the Postal Service are essential workers, and so I heard Hilary talking about knowing who his postman or postwoman was by name, and I can relate to that. And especially during this past year, and knowing that we all should take the time to just say thank you, because every day postal workers are walking out here taking their lives in their hands to deliver service to all of us. So I say thank you. And we know it's essential. We talked about that. Jennifer talked about that, and how important it was last year. That if it wasn't because we're dealing with a pandemic and we're dealing with an administration that was off the rails, in my opinion, and all that went with that, the attack on our ability to vote safely, and with all of the attacks on the U.S. Postal Service from within, right, and from without. The Postal Service kept moving and kept it alive, and so we had one of the largest turnouts in history. And if it wasn't for the Postal Service, that would not have happened. So we have to continue to fight for those voting rights, for the ability for the U.S. Postal Service to stay strong and be stronger and stronger, because it is a lifeline to a strong democracy. We don't know when the next pandemic will come, and so we have to have a strong Postal Service in order to make sure that happens. And I know also when it comes to business, when it comes to Black women entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of businesses that have been lost who relied on in-person sales. Again, the U.S. Postal Service is a lifeline to a strong business that could shift their business to being able to use the Postal Service. One, because of what the rates are, they're going to be reasonable. So again, Postal Service is a lifeline. So I just close to say, and I don't know if I've gone past my time, but at the end of the day, the Postal Service is the American treasure. It is our Postal Service. So I'm excited about the future. I'm excited and ready to roll up my sleeves, as many of us on this call and those who are listening do every day, so that we can make those other leaps and bounds, because there's so much that can be done through the Postal Service. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic that we have an opportunity to get our elected officials who believe in that reality to do what they need to do and provide the opportunities for the Postal Service to make businesses stronger, to continue to make our democracy stronger. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss today.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Say hello to you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, such a pleasure to meet you. So basically right now we're going to transition to some time for questions from all of you. And reminder, if you do have a question, it's best to identify yourself by hitting the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen. And if you can't find that, you can also literally raise your hand or call yourself out in the chat. And then we'll call on you and ask you to unmute yourself, and you can direct your question to one of our speakers. I'm unfortunately in the same boat as Melanie today and joining on my telephone. The internet on my computer decided to not work today. So Steve is going to help me out and call on some of our first questions. I do believe that the first question, though, will be coming from Porter McConnell. So Porter, if you want to go ahead and don't forget to unmute yourself and ask your first question, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, panelists. It was sobering to hear about the number of attacks on voting rights around the country. I was wondering what we can do, what folks can do to fight back on those attacks, and maybe specifically the vote by mail part of the equation. And then if anybody knows anything about Amber McReynolds, the nominee to the Postal Board of Governors, and her, Debbie knows. If you guys can speak to that a little, that would be very helpful. And thank you again.
I'll start. The one thing for sure, you talked about the attacks right now, as was stated, there are 43 states. So wherever you are, we have to push to get federal legislation passed, right? Now that's Hilary's lane, so I'm not going to speak deeply about it. But HR one, not HR one, but it's the John Lewis voter Restoration Act, and then also HR one, right? We need to get all of the reforms, but because right now folks are off the rails because we don't have our protections, right? So if we're going to systemically deal with it, we got to fight from the ground. People are fighting in Georgia, for instance, really fighting hard against what's happening in the state legislature in Georgia, but it's all over the country. When I saw Iowa, right, pass some voter suppression laws, I'm like, really? So it's an equal opportunity, although it has major impact on Black and brown folks. They're going after anybody that doesn't vote the way they want them to vote. And so we really are in a crisis, in my opinion, with what's going on. And we're going to have to call on Congress to do what they need to do, and our friends to, and I'm going to throw it out here, do something about the filibuster and do what we need to do so we can get some stuff passed swiftly, because that's what people voted for. They want change. We don't want more of the same. And if folks aren't going to work in a bipartisan manner, you have to do what you need to do. So that's what I think.
You know, let me also agree with Melanie very strongly. Sister's great. You look fantastic, as a matter of fact. The issues she's raising are absolutely essential, and that is the fight is at more than one level at the same time. And we're also seeing the various dimensions in which this fight is going on. What Melanie's saying is absolutely crucial, if I can borrow from the issue of voter empowerment, the tools that we have to make sure that things move the way they need to move. But we've watched systematically a process in which the very protections that we fought to put in place to make sure that voting should be easy for all Americans, while fraud should be difficult, as a matter of fact, to attain. But we've seen the kind of chiseling away that's occurred, whether you're talking about issues of one being able to, not being able to vote without having a government issued photo ID. Yes, that's still on the table. As for watching what's happening, you mentioned what was going on in Georgia and other places, as the push is to be able to make it more difficult for people to find time to vote. That tool, that power of the vote is under attack itself. So as we move to what is crucial with the coalition we're sitting with today, and that is to make sure that we protect our workers within the Postal Service arena. We see there's an interconnection between that and the other protections for workers in our country as well. So in essence, the fight has to happen at both levels. The reason our organizations are on this call is not just because we like being together. Everybody on here is great folks, but we also see that interdependency is crucially necessary for us to win the fights over voting rights protections, the fights over being able to expand that even further, even to restore the opportunity to vote. We were able to demonstrate in the last election that when we work together, even against those kind of odds, and a real, let me be nice and say, a real challenging leader in the White House, as we were experiencing then, we turned out more Americans to vote in this election than any other time in the history of the country, to make sure that the democracy, the will of the people, are very much on the table, and that we're able to protect that as we move things through. So we want to protect our voters, we want to protect our postal workers, we want to protect our workers, period. And the reason I put that in those terms is because there is a public relations initiative that's underway now that our organizations have to continue to shine the bright spotlight on. When I say that, I'm talking about the public relations movement that somehow believes that for workers to be able to get a retirement, they're somehow elite. For workers to be able to have health care, somehow they're outside the norm. But we know those are the very values that are true American values, workers' values, family values, that we have to continue to push forward on. The attacks that we're seeing under very interesting names, under things as basic as health care for our children, are the kind of issues that this fight is all about as well. And for to see another move being slick at hand come straight from the Trump playbook, as we move to take away a government service that provided such an extraordinary success and replace that with the highest bidder, as we move towards a privatization plan that is outrageous and where even more Americans will be locked out of the process is why we're here having this fight today. So let me just stop and say, I'm excited. I apologize, grew up Baptist. From time to time, we have a tendency to praise God and say a lot. But in these terms, I'm excited that we're taking today the way that we are, recognizing that our real tool for success is the kind of diversity that's represented on this call and the kind of diversity we have to continue to coordinate and organize on the ground in every city, state, and hamlet throughout this country.
I would just chime in there, and I would let my two partners here, Melanie and Hilary, they really said it all. I would just put a point on the issue of the filibuster. All of the issues that we've talked about today. Hilary talked in his opening remarks about how the people, despite so many obstacles in 2020, voted in record numbers. You know, sometimes risking their health and even their lives. Melanie talked about that as well. To put the team in place that is in place now, and they have opportunities to make change. There's HR 1, the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the PRO Act to protect and expand workers' rights, and so many other things. But if we don't figure out a way to get the filibuster out of the way, none of that will be able to happen. So I think it's important, as we are talking about the good things that can happen, to remember and to make sure we make part of our messaging on these issues that we will not take as an excuse that, oh, we couldn't get it done because of this backroom loophole called the filibuster that made us need 60 votes instead of 51 votes to pass these good things in response to the voters who brought a new team to town to do things for the people. So it's building the momentum for getting good things done, for passing these bills, and not taking the filibuster as an excuse. If they've got to get rid of it in order to get good things done, they should get rid of it.
Susan, it's Steve jumping in just to let you know that we've got people lined up with the mic. I think the next question will come from Richard Klein, and after him, Marjorie Harrison.
Thank you. I have a question. I proudly subscribe to the Postal Times that I get every day. And I do understand that we have 3 Board of Governors now, Democratic Board of Governors, that need to be confirmed by the Senate. But I also read that's a great thing what President Biden did, which we wanted. But I also read too about Louis DeJoy that, you know, he's got to go. But the thing is what I did read, and you people, you know, like I'm honest, know more about this than I do, so you can explain to me. It did state that even with these the 3 new Board of Governors, they said that it's still going to be difficult to get rid of Louis DeJoy. But I think if we get rid of him and we get somebody that really knows and is gung-ho and that is really in tuned from the Postal Service, that work themselves up in the system, that's dedicated, that's going to be a huge change right there. But until that happens, every day that he's in there, he's going to rip it apart further. And what's more, he's very cocky. He has an attitude that nobody can touch me. He's arrogant. I've watched him with the congressional hearings, with the testifying and getting very obstinate when asked questions by the congressional members on the committee. So maybe you can explain to me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Susan, gonna answer.
I was just going to say, panelists, do you guys want to jump in there?
Richard said it all.
Yeah. I'm not intimately involved, but just from the outside looking in, saying, yeah, he needs to go, whatever that takes.
Okay. Well, Susan, Marjorie Harrison's got the next question. Kiana Falk from Our Revolution's on deck, and there was also a couple questions about how S1 would affect vote by mail.
Okay, so I guess do I ask my question now? I guess I want to pick up on some of the things that have been said today. First of all, to thank the panelists. I've really learned a lot, and yesterday I attended, and I also learned a lot. I wanted to sort of link into something that was discussed yesterday that's very relevant to the discussion today about privatization. And what seemed to emerge to me yesterday, and it's again today, is that unionism and the ability to form unions is fundamental if we're going to have any chance of protecting the post office as well as other public institutions from being picked off by either direct privatization or public-private partnerships that are privatization by 1,000 cuts. And it seems to me in this particular moment that the right to organize, just like the right to vote, is a fundamental civil right that without which so many other rights, the ability to have a dignified job, a retirement, to build family wealth cannot be achieved. And I was just hoping that the panelists might comment on how we link together the fight around the PRO Act and the right to organize with the fight to protect workers from employment discrimination and to enable people to have a pathway into the middle class for themselves and their families. Thank you.
You know, I could begin by just giving you a very hearty amen to your analysis, since I think you've laid the answers out on the table very well. If we're thinking about the interconnection between these areas and whatnot, we'll get attacked successfully from a side that's not covered. So in essence, as we think about the conversation we're having here, we know each other here in Washington for the most part. If we're trying to organize our voters, that first call is going to go to Melanie Campbell from the NAACP as she coordinates the great work that we do in our communities to make sure those rights and opportunities are protected. So if we're going through this a narrative that actually ties all this together, I believe is essential. It's one that will be actually seasoned, if I can use that term, by the communities we're trying to actively engage. But what's crucially important is that we recognize the importance of having that checkoff list. So as we do the kind of work we do here in Washington, in Missouri, that's my home state, and oh boy, the fights need to happen there and greater organization need to happen there as well. Or as we're seeing the fight that's picking up in Georgia, and knowing that we're going to have to go back even after the election, even after the runoff, to try to actually secure a lot of those protections, as Melanie will tell us in meetings all the time. So the issue is tying that narrative to our communities is going to be important. And it's going to have to be tweaked a bit for each community so we understand the impact there. Look, it was downright hurtful to see what happened in Atlanta yesterday to members of the Asian community. But we've seen that kind of attack happen. That doesn't excuse it, just means that we didn't fix it. And we're going to have to. The conversation we're going to have, most people will say, why are you having a discussion about issues like people being the Chinese government being blamed for coronavirus, when the other issue is just being able to vote? Well, being able to tie all those together for people to see exactly what's going on is crucial for us as well, particularly in the middle of this pandemic. It is the U.S. Postal Service that made sure that we were able to fix those gaps to get the coronavirus vaccine out. We give them tremendous appreciation for the extraordinary conditions that none of us had experienced before. I mean, some of that stuff had to be sub-frozen and then transported in that sub-frozen fashion. And it is those U.S. postal workers that were able to make the adjustments and get things done, and millions upon millions of Americans so far. I believe we're up to about 13 million have gotten both doses now, and we continue to move forward in the right direction. There's an interconnection then between the protecting the rights of postal workers and healthcare. The narrative has to be clear as we move through all these processes, including we know that in 2 years, less than 2 years now, we're going to have another election. We know that our friends in the House have been able to hold on well. And as a response to that, we've seen more women, more people of color, greater diversity, chairing committees that are important to get our agenda through the US Congress more than ever before. But we also still recognize this is a federalist society. And that is, laws are made here in Washington, D.C., but the real implementation of those things happen at the state level. We have to continue to work together within that narrative to tie together the fight that's going to happen there as well. And under normal circumstances, my guess is Melanie will be racking up a tremendous number of frequent flyer miles going back and forth to help make sure our folks are getting out and taking care of business on the ground in the voting process. Well, these are extraordinary circumstances now. So that narrative is going to have to include new ways to utilize technology. I did not even know what the hell Zoom was 2 years ago, but who doesn't know what Zoom is today? So let me stop there and say, I'm excited about the work that we do together. There's nothing better and more effective than the kind of coalition that we know we're going to need to actually realize the changes necessary in our country.
That's great. If the other panelists don't want to weigh in, we'll go to our next question from Kiana.
Hi, thank you. So this is about the filibuster, and I guess I even put in the chat about like the idea that if it can't be gotten rid of, maybe it can be, your thoughts on maybe perhaps it can be limited to say voting rights, First Amendment rights, or give people more representation, H1, all that kind of thing. Thoughts on that? Or, and relating to, is there a strategy of like getting people to pressure their Congress leaders, whether it be state, federal, state, county, city, mayor, etc., to pressure Congress to like do something about the filibuster?
I can plant a little seed, but that's all I want to do this. I apologize. Just you guys are giving me too many questions that are exciting for us to talk about. We've had major discussions within the civil rights community about the filibuster. Many of you have heard the term nuclear option. It became a key component of our fights along those lines that led to what we have now. Mitch McConnell pulled the trigger and just blew everything up. The real issue now is who's in charge. So whoever's leading when the filibuster situation as it is now will have all kinds of advantages. The upside is that we've got friends in the White House, we've got friends in leadership in the House and friends in leadership in the Senate. And the Senate, of course, being most important as we think about the filibuster rule. So all that being said, I agree with the way that President Biden is framing it right now. When he says, and someone that has spent 30 years in the Senate and seen leadership go from Democrats to Republicans and then back again, when he says we really need to sit down and make sure that we analyze all the ways it works. Right now, we can do a number with the filibuster that would strongly benefit what we need to do. As a matter of fact, that's kind of how it happened last time. It's also how we ended up with some very good judges on the bench that were not blocked in the US Senate, as we've seen happen more recently. So all that being said, we do need to have that debate and discussion about how it works, but we also have to think about it in terms of how it would work for us now, which could be quite beneficial. But leaving the rules in place along those lines, if you see a transition, keep in mind, the US Senate, it's literally a one vote margin, how that will work under other circumstances, but it needs to happen. We need to renovate, and I'll use that term seriously, renovate the filibuster rule.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Thank you, Hilary, and thanks for the question, Kiana. You know, the filibuster is sort of has become an abomination of a back room, kind of a loophole almost, and has been wielded really as a sort of a partisan tool of just plain obstruction. Hilary alluded to, you know, back in the Obama administration, it was used to literally block hundreds of judicial and executive branch appointments, including appointments to the National Labor Relations Board. And folks on this call were involved, along with the Democracy Initiative and many folks, just saying, listen, this this is not working. Government is not working. The government needs to be able to govern. And so changes were made to the filibuster at that time as a result of public pressure, as a result of people saying, listen, you answer to us, and you can't use this backroom maneuver, especially one like the filibuster, which really, you know, has a very, very ugly history as, you know, primarily a tool used by segregationists and opponents of civil rights to block civil rights, weaken civil rights, block anti-lynching legislation. And it has sort of, and it is this backroom tool. You know, often it has progressed to where it's very often wielded in secret. You don't know who's behind it, and it just has stopped. It has stopped good things from happening. We can't afford that anymore. You know, we talked about the 250 anti-voting bills that are sort of on the march across the land. If we don't take action with the 2022 elections looming, we're going to have a very hard time competing, getting people to vote. People are trying to, you know, the forces against democracy are on the march, and democracy is democracy is under assault. The filibuster, you know, our view is that the best way to galvanize change within the Senate rules is to put as much pressure as we can on them to produce results, to use the governing mandate that they got in 2020 from voters who braved all kinds of odds to get out there and vote. And, you know, yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Schumer talking about the For the People Act, he said failure is not an option. That is absolutely true. It is not an option.
The only other thing, Susan, I just want to just hone in a little more about the fact that there is a history to the filibuster. And history is a great teacher if we decide to learn from the history. And so something that was done to block civil rights should make all of us question, why is it still there? If we can get down to the fundamentals of things and know that why it was done, and then what's happening now, the last 10 years plus, this Congress has been unable to move because folks won't work in a bipartisan fashion. And it's not partisan to say who's been the blocker. It's not. And so at the end of the day, it's like, who didn't allow bills to go on the floor for a vote? So that's the, and I hope y'all might not invite me back, and I love you anyway if you don't. But we have to be real and be able to talk to each other and be real. Like, I don't care who you vote for. You shouldn't care who I vote for. We've gotten to such in our corners that we can't just be real. Sometimes the Democrats don't do everything right, and doggone it, sometimes Republicans don't do things right. And if they're not doing things to your own best interest, you have to change who that is. And if we don't do that in this country, we're going to keep having what happened in Atlanta. They can say what they want to. That boy went in there and shot up some people because he didn't like who they were. I grew up in a place that was full of, I grew up in Florida. People say it's not the South. Yes, it is if you where I'm from. And even in 2016, I saw racism that I hadn't seen in my lifetime rear its ugly head. In 2016, right? When people riding through Black neighborhoods with Confederate flags, who never have done that, to intimidate people. And then you have people who did what they did on January 6th. What more do we need to know that we've got to make change? Well, this is going to continue. And so this filibuster, we can get caught on process, but at the end of the day, we got to get some things done, right? And it's life or death things that have to get done. The fact that the American Rescue Plan, that I know I'll bank my little nonprofit paycheck, that what's in that bill affected every low-wage worker, every middle-class worker, and somebody in your family or my family is able to pay their rent or pay their mortgage or buy their groceries. But yet you had a vote that was broken down by party. And so I say to folks, get to the people, and you got to tell, if you voted for the Republicans, get them online. If you voted for the Democrats, some of our friends act like they're not our friends. We have got to put the pressure on these elected officials because they work for us. And they need to stop working against us. And we have to be able to have honest conversation without it feeling like I'm attacking you personally, because it's not. I know that I do this because I want to see change. Yes, I have a vested interest in being a Black woman in America with all of the things that we have had to endure. But I fight so that everybody has a shot. And when they're attacking this vote right now, as an example, right? Or if they're not going to push to make sure that people can organize, that's you and me. That's your brother, my sister, no matter what color you are. And I know for Black women and Black people, that's how we made it to the middle class, with jobs like at the U.S. Postal Service. So that's, and I say, y'all might not invite me back.
It looks like we need to move on. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Definitely yeah, this has been a fantastic and powerful discussion, and hopefully you can check out the chat. Lots of cheering for you. That's amazing. But I just want to thank everyone for your participation in the discussion. It was great. And thanks again to our panelists, Hilary, Shelton, Jennifer Lamson, and Melanie Campbell.